Hey everybody. Today we have a special episode. In honor of Holocaust Remembrance Day, my guest and I, Brooke Rich, discuss her personal journey to Europe where she visited many of these sites where these horrible atrocities during the Holocaust occurred. Along her journey, she also discovered that many of her husband's family members were lost during the Holocaust. So this is a very personal story to her. I ask that everyone please take a moment and think about everyone we lost during the Holocaust. I also think about, in these times of uncertainty, of all the anti-Semitism that has risen up. I'm going to keep talking about this subject. I'm going to keep talking about it and bringing it to the forefront because anti-Semitism has no place in 2024. If you like this content, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Enjoy. Hey, everybody. Today, my guest, Brooke Rich, you are a teacher and you came across a wonderful story with your husband's family. And it's a story of tragedy and a story of adversity and ultimately at the end, a story of triumph.
Yes.
I wanted to talk to you about this story because in light of national events recently and international news with the things going on in Israel with Gaza and the things going on with Iran and Israel and the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States. And I can't believe I'm saying that in 2024. The rise of anti-Semitism it's disturbing to say the least.
Yes, it is.
I wanted to talk to you about your husband's family and the story and ultimately your story and your travels. I wanted to get into all that first, and then we'll get into your thoughts and opinions on the current state of things going on right now.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
So what originally prompted you to start researching this side of the family?
So I married my husband, Alexander Rich, on December 17th, 2016. But we've been together for a long time. That's why dates are, we've been together for a long time.
Us too.
Yeah. We met in high school. We were friends. And then, one thing led to another, fell in love, and now we're married. I've obviously always loved history. That's what I teach. I've been teaching for 7 years now, and I have a real passion for the subject. I believe it's the most important subject to teach. I know math believes they're the most, Everyone believes theirs is the best, but I truly believe that we can't function as a society if we don't understand our history.
Absolutely.
There's no way to move forward if we don't understand our past. And so I always like to travel in the summers. I have a really good fellow teacher who got me hooked on these deals that teachers get to go on. And we pretty much get to travel for free because they want us to see these places and to tell the truth so that you don't have to fake news it. You get to stand where it happened, witness it with your own eyes, and then you bring it back to the classroom. That's the whole point of the trips. And so I came across one on Facebook, of all places. And I'm always very hesitant of what it comes across on Facebook, but this one sounded really good. It's a group out of Minnesota. They're like JCRC. It is a group of Jewish members in Minnesota and a couple of teachers. And they were looking for 20 teachers to go on a trip to Europe for 10 days, and you study the Holocaust. And I said, well, that sounds pretty fascinating. I teach that in my classroom for a couple days. My husband's Jewish. I didn't know anything about the family at the time, but I knew that he was Jewish. So I applied. I didn't think I was going to get in because I'm just some girl from St. Joe,
Right.
Who's ever heard of St. Joe Mo? But I got a message back. You've been chosen to go on this trip. I did not know a single person. I hopped on a plane in Minnesota with 30 strangers, flew across the ocean for the first time to Europe by myself, without my husband or anyone, and we
Wow.
landed in Germany. Right? And the very next day, we entered the first concentration camp on our list, which was Dachau.
And that was among the worst, if I'm not mistaken.
It was the first one that was established really early. At first, it was used for political opponents, and then later on, it was used for Jews. And it's where they tested the gas chambers to perfect the way they wanted to execute people later on in the bigger camps that you've heard of, Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Right.
And Dachau was actually one of the camps that America helped to liberate. One of his great uncles, Dr. Joe Friedman, who's a native of St. Joe, he helped liberate Ohrdorf, which was a sub-camp of Dachau. And so when I went on the trip, I knew Joe Friedman had done this. And so when I went there, there was a huge map of all the camps. And there it was, Ohrdorf, right there. And I didn't get to visit it yet. Maybe one day get to go. But I got to point to it and recognize that his family was among the brave people of America to liberate the camp.
Right.
So he witnessed it with his own eyes, and then did an interview with the Holocaust Museum about it. And so hearing his interview and then being able to stand there myself was very powerful for me. And Dr. Joe Friedman is one of my heroes, even though I never got to meet him. Unfortunately,
Right.
he passed before I was able to meet him, but he went on to do amazing things.
So when you walked in, did you immediately get that sense that I don't even know how to describe it when I feel it. I feel that way as I'm watching documentaries. And I can't even imagine what it must be like to actually stand there. The closest I think I've came was I visited the Winchester Museum the Winchester House Museum in San Jose, California. It's a really old place, and I got that feeling of just somberness. Was it like that visiting the Dachau?
Yes, I think that I thought I was prepared because I teach history. You know, I've seen the pictures, I've heard the stories. But when I walked in and actually saw the camp and stood where people were forced to stand unwillingly, and where they were murdered, there was a gas chamber there, and 15 people were gassed in that gas chamber just to make sure it worked. And we actually walked through the gas chamber.
Wow.
And going from room to room and realizing we came out, but those 15 souls never did. Yeah, life-changing in that moment. And that was only the first concentration camp we went to.
And now you also went to Auschwitz in Poland, correct?
Yep, we went to Poland. I actually really loved Poland. When I went to Poland, I just felt different. His family is from Belarus, it's debatable. Was it part of Poland? Was it part of the Soviet Union at the time? So I don't know. It felt different going into Poland. I liked Germany. I think since I went in with the headspace of I'm studying the Holocaust, I'm standing where Nazis stood, where Hitler
Right.
stood, it made Germany very hard for me.
Right.
So when I went to Poland, it was just a different feel. But when we went to Auschwitz-Birkenau, there has been no other feeling like that in my life.
So one of the things that really gets me when I'm studying or researching or watching documentaries about Auschwitz is the glasses and the luggage and the
Yes.
shoes and the clothes. And I'm starting to get a little emotional just talking about it right now because there's mountains of eyeglasses.
Yes.
You wouldn't think that's a visual representation of how many lives were not only destroyed but taken.
Yeah.
Those people will never and there's no reason. There's no reason at all.
I mean, the Nazis believed the reason was that the Jewish people didn't deserve to be on this earth with them, right? That's what they believed the reason was. And when they said this, they had no compassion for the fact that, oh, that's someone's mom. That's
Right.
someone's child. That's my husband's great-great-grandma. You know, they didn't think about it that way because to them, the Jews weren't people.
Right.
They were an infestation that needed to be gotten rid of. And at Auschwitz-Birkenau, we did see the glasses. We saw a huge display of plates, dishware, because they were told, we're taking you somewhere better, because they had been in the ghettos, which the ghettos were terrible in themselves.
Right.
So they said, pack your stuff. We're taking you somewhere better. And so they brought everything with them, their dishes, their shoes, their glass, what everybody would bring. And the display of dishes it was unfathomable. And that's only a small amount that's on display.
Right.
The hardest room for sure at Auschwitz-Birkenau, besides the gas chamber, obviously, was the hair. Now, the hair room, no one can take pictures of. They don't allow photography in the room. So if you see pictures of it, it's probably produced by the actual museum because we were told no photography in this room, which when I walked into the room, there's no way I could have even taken a picture of it. I thought it was going to be just a small container, just a small display. It was bigger than this room. It was full of actual human beings' hair. And I knew that Nazis kept the hair, but until I went to Auschwitz-Birkenau, I didn't know why they kept the hair. And on the trip, I learned that they would use the hair to make mattresses out of, and people would sleep on them, and they would weave it into clothing that they would then sell. So people were walking around wearing human hair and sleeping on human hair. And so when I walked into that room, that was one of the 2 rooms where I got physically ill, and I had to leave.
And essentially that was funding the war machine, and that was ultimately led to the demise of millions of people.
Yeah, the slave labor that took place in the camps, the companies that would use these people. His family, one of the members that was killed in the Holocaust, he was used as slave labor in a lumber camp. So they were cutting down trees and shipping it upriver. And so this slave labor was a real thing. And people died, they were literally worked to death.
Yeah, work them to death. And that we're still seeing that in some parts of the world today.
Yes, it's true.
And I don't understand why this stuff isn't brought to people's attention before we get addicted to the products that is, because, I talk about it a lot with my cell phone. My cell phone was made with slave labor, and I had nobody asked me if that was okay. And I just learned about it. I haven't bought a new phone since. It's real. I mean, it's trashed. I mean, it's broken. I haven't bought a new phone since. I can't bring myself to do it until that one completely breaks because of the unethical practices that huge business, and we don't get a say in that.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous on a whole different level to me that human suffering would be okay as long as we get our cheap crap.
Yeah. It was millions of people into this forced labor. And at Auschwitz-Birkenau, the amount of people that were murdered in such a short amount of time is hard for us to really wrap our heads around.
Right.
That many human beings were shipped in like cattle on a train and never came out just because of who they were.
Right.
And I went with a girl, her actual grandpa, not great-grandpa, her actual grandpa was murdered at Auschwitz, and she stood right next to me. So we were walking around the camp together that her actual grandpa was murdered in. And that is something I will never forget. It was very powerful to walk with a person who has a direct tie. Her grandpa got off the train, and he faked a limp because he thought he would be spared. And he didn't realize that disableds were some of the first to be killed along with women and children. And so he was straight to the gas chamber. And his granddaughter, took that same path, except she got to come out. When we went into the gas chambers, we came out, but she had to go in realizing her grandpa never did. And so when we came out of the gas chambers, we all had to take a moment. I almost couldn't go in, but I forced myself to go in just for a brief time because it was overwhelming. I also couldn't even bring myself to take pictures. You can take pictures in there, but I just couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to. So when we exited the gas chamber at Auschwitz-Birkenau, just knowing that I was able to do that with her, and she had this sense of kind of closure. It was the first time she had been to Auschwitz-Birkenau herself, and being able to do that with her, we entered this as strangers, and we came out as friends, and we are still friends today.
That's awesome.
It is. It is very awesome.
Really
She's a
awesome.
wonderful lady.
So where else did you kind of visit while you were there?
So we went to Nuremberg. There's a fascinating history in Nuremberg. It's a great place to vacation if you ever want the like old time medieval feel. But then there's always that dark history behind it, right? In Germany, there's always this underlining history that I had to come to terms with. So we went to Nuremberg, which has beauty and tragedy. Went to Dachau. We also went to Munich, which is important because that is where Hitler first tried to overthrow the government.
Yeah.
So he had the beer hall putsch, and we walked in the street where he walked and had a shootout with police and the Nazis. They engaged in a shootout, and some of the Nazis were killed on that day, and then Hitler was sentenced to prison, right? And so we walked that same path that he walked, and then we went to Nuremberg in Germany. That was our last stop. And Nuremberg is really important for two reasons. One, it's where Hitler had his major rallies. You've probably seen the pictures of the large people that came out for Hitler. And the second reason why it's important is because that's where the Nuremberg trials were held. So after the war, we got to sit in the actual courtroom where major Nazis were put to justice.
I imagine that was pretty powerful feeling too.
It was very powerful. Sitting in the same courtroom made me uncomfortable, but also this sense of, well, at least something was done. You know, at least they did something. Obviously, not every Nazi was held accountable, but the major Nazis, they had this belief, let's get the major ones, you know, gives some people some justice.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
I think for the most part, they did a pretty good job with that. They did. Do you know anything about Operation Paperclip?
No.
So the Soviets and Allied forces went after the fall, after World War II was over. They went and snatched up all the Nazi scientists. And as a matter of fact, Werner von Braun, he built the Saturn V missile that got us to the moon. He was a Nazi. And so if you ever get a chance to do a deep dive on Operation Paperclip, Annie Jacobson has a really wonderful book about that.
Okay.
And she goes deep into the story and how, like, each person involved in Operation Paperclip and how they were chosen and why. Basically, it was a struggle between the Allied forces and Soviets who could get the best people, and so they could fight each other, and that was the start of the Cold War.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a whole different
Different
subject
topic.
in
Yes.
itself.
Yes. It's
But,
a whole different subject for sure.
Was there any place that you really wanted to visit that you didn't get to?
I wanted to visit Berlin. And this summer, the group that I went with, they're going to Berlin this summer. And it just didn't work out. I want to now go to Belarus because that's where his family lived and was killed. I didn't know that at the time when I went on the trip. But I would like to one day go to Belarus. There was one survivor in the family in the village, and his daughter, she is planning a trip to Belarus within like the next year.
Right.
She really wants to go and bring her dad back. He is the sole survivor of the Feldman male line, and he turns 90 this year.
That's awesome.
Yep, he's living in Israel right now.
That's awesome.
Yes, it is.
So what prompted you originally to start researching the family? And because was it after the trip or okay?
It was after the trip. In Auschwitz-Birkenau at the end, there's a room called the Book of Names.
Yeah.
And in the Book of Names, I found 15 pages of Friedman's. And I found 2 pages of Zitz. So our actual last name is Zitz. And when Jake Rich immigrated to America at Ellis Island, either he said it as Rich or they heard it as Rich. We don't really know the story, but our name went from Zitz to Rich. So that's what we are. And there were 2 pages of Rich, and then there were a handful of names for Feldman. And it's the Feldman line that I have done research on now for about a year. And it wasn't until January that I really kind of cracked the code, if you will, on the family story. And what people always ask me, like, why are you doing this? You know, like, you're not Jewish. What drives you to do that? It's probably the question I get asked the most is, why are you doing this? Why are you putting yourself through this? Because it's obviously not a happy topic. Why are you doing this? So I always tell people there's a couple reasons. I don't know if you believe in destiny, right? But I do. And there is a Hebrew word for destiny that I've recently learned. And I believe my husband and I got married because obviously we loved each other. But I also believe that maybe I became a history teacher. Maybe God put Alex in my life for this reason. We have a daughter together who has his blood. And so when I'm researching the family, I'm reminded that this isn't my blood, but it's my daughter's.
Right.
And one day when she gets older, I'm going to be able to tell her what her blood had to go through, what they were forced to do just because of who they were and what they believed
what they're
in.
still going through.
And what they're still going through. When the October 7th attack happened in Israel, I was completely devastated. And then when this recent attack by Iran happened, I contacted the family in Israel just like hourly to make sure everything was okay. And my daughter, she actually got to meet the 4-year-old granddaughter of the survivor. And they got to meet over Zoom, right? Technology, right here on a podcast, right? Technology can be a good thing. And so my daughter every single day, almost every single day, asks, how's the baby? How's Arabelle, the 4-year-old? You know, how's your uncle doing? Because my daughter now has this new family that almost didn't exist because of Nazis. He was this close from not existing on this earth. And that family would have been completely wiped out. And my daughter wouldn't have these new people in her life who actually love her now. So even though they haven't met face to face, my daughter is loved by these new people that almost didn't exist.
So the history of the family during the Holocaust really kind of started before the Holocaust.
Oh, yeah.
And do you want to get into the first events that really kind of started kicking off the turmoil, I guess, that started the whole thing?
Yes.
Do you want to get into that?
Yes. So the matriarch of the family, I always start with the matriarch. The matriarch of the family is Haya. Kamenetsky is her, what's the word? Maternal? Maiden name. Okay, her maiden name. So Haya Kamenetsky is her maiden name. And she was married to Mayor Udall Feldman. So you got Mayor Udall and you got Haya. And they had 10 children, right? Which to me, I only got one, right? We got one kid. 10 sounds like a lot.
4.
Okay, you got 4. 10, right? In a small village in Drokishin, Belarus, right? It is a farming town. There is not much else there. You got fields. You got a couple of buildings, small homes. It's not a rich area, but they were happy people. They're just living a normal life in peace. They just happened to be Jewish, right? That's their faith. And they were very strong Orthodox Jews, practicing Jews. And they had 10 children. Most of them had immigrated elsewhere before the war. So Alex's actual line, her name is Esther Feldman, and she married David Friedman, and they moved to St. Joe. And that was in the late 1800s. So they have been members of the Jewish community of St. Joe since the 1800s.
That's awesome.
It is amazing. So her brothers and sisters moved elsewhere. A couple went to Chicago. One sister went to what is now Israel. At the time, I was in Israel. But she was living there. The real people that were left was Joe Feldman. He got sent out only a few years before the Nazis invaded. That's a story in itself. That's actually kind of interesting. He got a girl pregnant and was sent away, not just out of the house, sent out of the country for getting this girl pregnant.
That's a little harsh.
I know, but
it saved his life.
If he hadn't been sent out of the country, the book that we've learned all of this from would not exist because he helped write the book.
Wow.
Destiny. Like something intervened for him at least. His brother Leib, unfortunately, was not saved. And he was a victim of the Holocaust. Some call it Holocaust by bullets because he was not killed via gas chamber. He was shot in cold blood while carrying his son in his arms and running for his life. His wife, Leib, was also murdered with their 1-year-old daughter. And the story of Leib is very powerful that I like to tell people. So Leib had a 1-year-old daughter named Dubka. And when they were first taken to the ghetto, the Nazis ripped babies out of mothers' arms. This is what they did. And so they ripped her 1-year-old baby out of her arms and threw her onto a cart to be disposed of later.
Wow.
And Leib had to watch her daughter not only be ripped out of her arms, but thrown onto this cart with other babies, and nothing can be done. And so she was then loaded onto a truck, and she saw this moment where the driver wasn't paying attention, and she made, I don't know if it was unconscious, it was probably just biological. She made a decision to get off the truck. So she jumps off the truck and she runs towards the cart. And as she's running towards the cart, it's chaotic, people everywhere. And so she just grabs what she thinks is her daughter, and she soon realizes it's not. And so she has to make a decision that no parent should have to make, that no person should have to make. Do I save this one? Do I save this child? Or do I risk it all and go back to that cart to save mine? Right. And so she decides to make the choice to go back. And she goes back, and somehow she finds her baby girl in the pile. And so that time her daughter will be saved, but the next time she will not. Oh. And they are taken to a mass grave that still is there in Drakkishen. It's marked by just a white fence, and their bodies are in that mass grave. They were lined up by the 100, stripped naked, and then shot by the Nazis in cold blood. And their bodies are still there. And if someone hadn't taken the time to at least put up a fence, there would be no recognition that my husband's blood is in that grave. We would not know. You wouldn't know. It looks just like a field.
Wow.
And these mass graves exist all throughout Europe.
Yeah.
They're there because there were so many victims of the Holocaust.
And it's on all sides. It's not just, I mean, it's kind of weird, but there's mass graves happening right now.
Oh, throughout the world.
Yeah.
Yes, throughout the world. This is still happening. But so Leib, he was taken to a forced labor camp, like I said. And Yankel, his 7-year-old son, was the only survivor. And he was also taken to the forced labor camp and forced to do slave labor, cutting down trees, until winter fell. And when winter came, the river froze that they would ship lumber up. And so they heard trucks one morning, and they knew what that meant. And so they just took off running towards the woods. They knew, if I can make it to the woods, maybe we can survive this thing. So Yankel's tired. He's 7. He's cold. He's hungry. He's been forced to work, and he gets tired. And his dad does what any good dad would do, and he picks up his kid. And they're running towards the woods while the Nazis are shooting at these people in a field. And I always tell people, Leib Feldman could outrun a lot of things, but he could not outrun that bullet that day. Yeah. A Nazi shot him. He dropped his son to the ground, and the last thing Yankel ever heard from his dad is keep running. Wow. And so Yankel, he ran to the woods, and he survived. And he dug a hole in the ground with about 15 other people from the village, and they survived on 1 or 2 raw potatoes a day until eventually he's picked up by the Soviets and just tossed into an orphanage. He turns 18, and he joins the military because there wasn't much else to do.
Right.
And then the best part of the story is he writes a letter, and it gets published in a Jewish newspaper in Argentina, of all places. Argentina.
Which is where, if you're not familiar with the story, that's where the Nazis ran.
Yes. And there just happened to be a person from that village living in Argentina, in the city that it ended up in. And he's reading this newspaper. And it was very common for survivors to write newspapers to try to find other survivors because they were dispersed all over the world. And he says, here's who I am, here's where I'm from, here's who my parents were, and here's who my grandparents were. And the guy gets a hold of the letter and sends it to Chicago, where Joe Feldman was living.
Wow.
And Joe Feldman is reading this, and the whole time he thought Yankel was dead. He thought his nephew had been murdered with the rest of the family.
Right, yeah.
And he's reading this, and he's like, can this be true? Can my nephew be alive? And so he calls up his sister, Helen Feldman, and Helen pays for him to fly to Sochi, Russia during the Cold War to meet his nephew who survived the Holocaust. And they meet up in Sochi, and he, questions to make sure he's legit, make sure this is my nephew, and it all adds up. That was his nephew, and
That's
he had
awesome.
survived. And Helen paid for Yankel and his wife and daughter Anat to move to Israel. She bought his first house, and he still lives in Israel today. He has 4 children now. Anat lives in Toronto, and the other three are in Israel with him. And he has several grandchildren.
That's awesome.
It is amazing. It is a story of heartbreak, and it is a story, though, of triumph. Life went on for Yankel. But the point of Holocaust Remembrance Day is to remember the 6 million lives who did not go on, the 6 million Jews who were killed within such a short span of history for just being Jewish.
And that 6 million number is highly debatable because it's probably a lot more than that.
That's just it. That's an estimate.
Yeah.
Because again, if they're just killed by the masses, it's really hard to document all of them.
Right.
So that is the story of Yankel, and I always tell people, when he got to Israel, he could have done so many things. He could have chosen violence and hate because his heart was probably full of it.
Right.
But he chose to be good, and music saved his life. He became a music teacher for the disabled in Israel, and he still plays music today. When I Zoomed with him, he played me a song on the piano. The man is 90 years old.
That's awesome.
I'm sitting in my kitchen in St. Joe. He's in Israel, and Nat's in Toronto, translating for us because we don't speak the same language. And the man is playing me a song on the piano. I wept. And his grandson comes crawling down the hallway, drawn to the music of his grandpa. Grandson who almost didn't exist, right? That grandson, Ari, he is the remaining Feldman male right now, the youngest Feldman male. So he is part of Yankel's line. And again, Yankel almost did not exist. He was almost killed with his dad that day.
7 years old, having to survive.
7 years old.
Survive without mom, survive without dad.
Grandparents.
In a strange place, in a hostile place.
He knew no one. He was an orphan.
Because after World War II, the Soviet Union was very hostile.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they were hostile before.
Right.
So a side story that I like to tell to bring in St. Joe, Mayor Udall, the patriarch of the family, in 1892, he decided to come to St. Joe because there was a lot of persecution going on of Jews in Belarus by the Soviets. Joseph Stalin, he was not very welcoming or accommodating of Jews. And so he came to St. Joe because that's where Esther had been living, his daughter. And we think that Haya, his wife, was pregnant at the time, and they also had the other kids back home. And so he came here, and while he was here, he decided to build a synagogue in St. Joe. Right? He felt like we needed one. St. Joe actually had 3 synagogues at the time, and he wanted to build a conservative synagogue. And so it no longer exists, sadly, but the only thing that remains of that synagogue was saved by Joe Friedman, which is Esther's son. Yes, Lily's brother. Yeah. Saved by Esther's son, and it exists right now. So if you guys know, the synagogue that is off, not the synagogue, the Jewish cemetery that is off Ashland, Sher Shalom, was built and established by David Friedman, my husband's great-great-grandpa. And it has been passed down through the line. So currently his grandpa runs it, Jeff Rich. He's kind of a name. Okay. He runs it currently, and there's this building at the cemetery, and inside the building, there's this beautiful metalwork. And that is the only thing that's remaining from the synagogue. Wow. Everything else was destroyed. And Joe Friedman decided, I need to save that.
Absolutely,
that needs to be kept in the family. And it's when I walked in and saw it, I cried. Knowing the story behind the family, I was so overwhelmed. Just seeing a piece of metal wouldn't bring most people to cry, but I wept.
Well, my wife makes fun of me sometimes because, so side story, we went down to Disney World, and that's one of those places you always dream of going when you're a kid. And I walked in the gates, and I got tears rolling down my face, and she's like, "What is wrong with you?" But I'm emotional as well. Like I'm kind of tearing up the whole time we've been talking to you, telling your story, and it is an amazing story of triumph, but very, very sad. Yes. And how that story began. And then you think of all the adversity that your uncle had to go through.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, I don't know if I could do it.
I know.
Even like when I was 7 years old, I hadn't even tied my shoes.
I know.
And for him to not only have to survive what he went through after all that, but just surviving the initial first 15 minutes. Oh. That must have been terrifying.
Yeah.
And I just can't imagine. And one of the things that really drew me into the Holocaust and World War II was because I didn't know much about it. And the reason why is because it's kind of glanced over in school. They kind of give you a highlight reel and that's about it.
Yeah.
And the story that really affected me, I was in the 8th grade and we were doing a class project and it was about the Holocaust and we were going to do some role playing. And I was to play a Jewish character and I had to live in a ghetto and it's just a whole story. And the most memorable part to me was when I went to school that morning, I chose socks with holes in them, not thinking that I would have to take my shoes off. And I was extremely embarrassed and sad because I had a hole in my sock.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget this teacher, what she said. Her name's Rhonda West. Shout out to Rhonda West. She said, don't worry about that because the Jewish people suffered so much more.
It's true.
And she said, and this just adds realism to the story. And so I took my shoes off with pride and I did the best job that I could do. And from that moment on, I was like, I want to learn everything I possibly can. And not as to be disrespectful, not because I'm not out of morbid curiosity, but just out of a respectful curiosity, because I feel like if we don't learn that it was all for nothing.
Yeah.
And for it to be all for nothing, what's the point? You know, like I just, you gotta get these, there's justice in carrying these people's memories on forever. And it just destroys me that not many people know more about what they learn in grade school, middle school, and high school.
Yeah.
People stop learning after school.
I know.
And that's always bothered me. That's always been, because I've only got an 8th grade education. I didn't graduate. I got my GED. And I'm pretty smart, but it's not from studying books. It's or not from studying math, science, and stuff.
Yeah.
It's really from studying history, because that's all I really cared about. Now I'm into UFOs and the government and all that, but that's a different story. But history has always really got me, especially American history. And then once I learned about World War I, World War II, World War II was really just an extension of World War I with Japanese imperialists thrown into it.
Yes.
And it was terrible. And it really changed the world. After World War I. There was a long period of economic instability globally, which led to World War II. And then once World War II was over, the landscape of the entire world had changed. We were basically between the Soviets and the United States, and that controlled the entire world for the next, was it 1992 the Soviet Union fell?
Yeah, 91, 92.
Yeah, and so and then the years after that we consider the best years ever, but I think that's really, I don't know if the Cold War ever stopped.
I have a very good friend who was born in Uzbekistan, and that friend is Anat Feldman, Yankel's oldest daughter, and she also believes that the Cold War has not ended. So
I think we're in a new phase. We got a lot of proxy wars going on. Russia, and it's been going on for years, decades. Korea, North and South Korea, that wasn't about North and South Korea. That was about Soviets versus the United States. And a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize, I've spoken to a lot of people recently, they don't realize how big of a part Russia played in defeating the German forces and the Axis powers during World War II.
Oh, yeah.
And most everybody I talk to says, oh, America won World War II. And I'm like, American money won World War II, but it was Russian bodies.
Yeah, they lost more casualties for sure. And they're the ones who liberated Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Yeah.
The Soviets are the ones who liberated that. And then you had America coming in from the West with his family.
Ironically, it was because they wanted to take it over, but still, they,
Yeah.
Poland, Russia, and all the Baltic states over, they all have a huge history, and the Western world just doesn't understand.
Yeah.
And I don't think we will understand until there's nothing left to understand.
Yeah.
They live differently over there. They feel differently, and we keep trying to force our Western values on them. They don't like it. So
Yeah, in Poland and Belarus, there's some new movements that are going on to really try to bring back Jewish life. So when I was in Poland, we went to the JCC, which is a Jewish community center.
Yeah.
And they're thriving to bring, there are people in Poland who don't know they're Jewish because they were hidden away.
Yeah.
Or their parents or grandparents were killed and they have no...
Or they were re-educated.
Yeah, or they had to hide it for so long, and some are still scared to acknowledge it. But there are people in Poland and Belarus that are acknowledging it and are proud to be Jewish.
Absolutely.
And in Belarus, there's a project going on right now where they're raising funds to build a cemetery in Brest. And it's going to be actual Jewish headstones that were just tossed aside and destroyed. There's a group called the Together Plan based in London that found them and is bringing them back together to be a place where people can go and remember what happened to Belarusian Jews. And I'm hoping one day we will get to go
That's awesome,
and stand in that place.
I actually spoke to my wife, is it a year ago? A year or two ago? No, I think it was right around a year ago about going to Poland. Because right now it's probably the safest Poland's going to be for a while.
Poland was great.
Well, I mean, because right across the border there is Ukraine, and what's going on there.
Yes,
But there's, I want to say there's like 3,000 American troops in Poland, and like, of course, NATO's a huge presence there.
Yeah.
So I think right now would probably be the safest it's going to be for a while.
You should go. I went to Krakow. That's where we stayed.
Yeah.
I loved Krakow. You guys should go to Krakow.
I right now I just can't afford it. Like, I've looked into it's not that bad price to go.
It's good.
We were surprised at to get us both there. Round trip tickets is $2,000.
Yeah.
And that's like, wow.
Yeah, and it's not expensive to stay there. The food and everything is very affordable.
Well, we were talking about that too. I was like, somebody had said something about spending $20,000, and I was like, well, hell, you could spend a month in Europe on $20,000.
Yeah, it was, and it's beautiful.
And
the
live like a
countryside.
king.
Yeah, it's just the history, that's also tough. But the beauty of Poland is there, and like I said, the Jewish community is trying to remain strong. I always like to tell people, sometimes when we teach history with Native Americans, with Jews, we tell the story and then we act like it just ended. Like somehow they no longer exist.
Right.
But Jews are here and they're proud to be Jewish and they're proud of their families. I'm proud of my husband's family. People ask me, what's your favorite part of the trip? My favorite part of the trip was learning about my husband's family. To really feel blessed to be married into this family is amazing. His grandpa, Jeff Rich, has been so supportive. And then a cousin, Keith, who lives in St. Louis, he's been doing genealogy for 30 years in our family. And I connected with him, and he is the one who really helped me learn a lot. Because people ask me, well, how do you find all this out? He helped a lot. A book that I stumbled upon. First, I got it in Yiddish, which is not helpful because I don't speak Yiddish. But then I found it in English, and there they were. I opened the book, and there they are. Seeing their faces was a moment I will never forget. For the first time, I was able to have names and faces and a story. Because the story that had been told in the family, I don't know how it got started, but it wasn't true. But now we actually know what happened to them. And like you said, we have to keep it alive.
Yeah.
I always tell people, if the Nazis tried so hard to eliminate my husband's family, I'm going to work twice as hard to keep the family alive.
Oh, absolutely. And I think with current events going on, it's just watching this stuff and the knowledge that I have, and I don't have a very deep knowledge. I know a lot of things about a lot of things, but I don't know everything about anything.
Yeah.
So for me, just the things that I do know, the things that are going on right now are terrifying
They're terrifying.
because we've seen this all before. And it's exactly what happened right before World War II. And I saw this coming, like, so when Russia invaded Ukraine, the news broke late at night. I was up for, the next 3 hours crying because the first thing I thought of was my kids. And I thought, the only thing my kids are going to know is war.
Yeah.
We've been at war
Yeah.
for the last 20
I know.
years. And then we stop, and then Russia invades Ukraine.
Right.
There's no end in sight to this war yet. And it's a war based on false pretenses. Russia is trying to eliminate Nazism in Ukraine. That's what they say. Ukraine's got a Jewish president, and now he is kind of corrupt, based on our standards. But he is a Jewish president, and the Nazism that we're seeing in Ukraine isn't really any. We have a right-wing community in the United States, and it's not any more or less than what we have here. And then at some point you have to allow freedom of speech. And to combat that, you have to educate people.
Right.
You can't just say, no, you can't have these people over here. Educate them why that's wrong. Educate them why, obviously, if you ever read or listened to Hitler and his books, or book Mein Kampf, it is ridiculous from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And anybody with an ounce of intelligence would see this is just craziness. But it's important to not erase that as well. We have to combat that with knowledge and with history of what happened, what these ideas, just very basic ideas. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but something I've heard recently is Jewish people own all the banks. That's not true. That's not even close to true.
It's always been a lie.
And I hear things like that, and I want to correct that.
Yeah.
I want to say, no, that's not true. Why would you say that? And I do get a little defensive about it.
Yeah.
And I don't really get defensive about that with many things, but I feel a certain connection. I'm not Jewish. I'm not religious in any way. I was was raised like Southern Baptist, but I'm not practicing at all.
Yeah.
I cuss like a sailor. I live like a sinner. So I'm not religious at all. And so for me, it's more about the knowledge that I have of what the Jewish community has been through, not just over the last 100 years, thousands of years.
Thousands.
And that's hearing the protests at universities right now, Free Palestine. These, forgive my language here, but these idiots don't know what the hell they're cheering for. Be careful what you wish for. Free Palestine. I don't know how many of those people watched even CNN, people that aren't allowed to show things graphic in nature. The attacks of October 7th were, that was Israel's 9/11. And in a lot of ways, it was very personal.
Oh, yeah. It was the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust.
I don't even know what to say. And I was watching that, and I'm like, this is disgusting.
Yeah.
This is disturbing. And a lot of people don't know that Hamas still has hostages.
Oh, yeah.
5 Americans.
Yeah.
And what is our government, what is the message that our government is sending by not going to get those hostages? And more than that, how are we going to dictate how Israel chooses to defend themselves? Because it's not us that those rockets are pointing at.
No.
It's the civilians and the people of Israel. And you know about the Iron Dome?
Yeah.
The Iron Dome was designed because there's always a target there.
They need the protection.
There's always somebody coming after them.
Yeah. And it was successful, thankfully.
Yeah, I think they said over 90%.
Yeah.
And that's That's really great considering how close those missiles are coming
Yeah.
in. If you know anything about military technology, Iron Dome is among the best software in the world.
Yeah.
And the reason is because they have to take out close targets.
Yeah.
For us, we can use the Patriot system because nothing is coming in that close.
Close.
Like
Yeah.
we can get it long range. But the Iron Dome is mixing it up with Patriot missiles now. And so our technology is getting better at being able to defend. And I think it is very important to help Israel. Also, while giving humanitarian aid across those gates, I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I think that's acceptable. But what I don't think is acceptable is allowing terrorists to use human shields and just say, okay, you can have everybody because you're hiding. You know, I don't think that's acceptable.
Yeah.
And it never has been.
Yeah.
I understand that there's a certain way you have to handle things so that people don't get hurt. But, you know, the IDF is suffering bad casualties. A lot of these protesters don't understand that they're exercising restraint by going in there on foot. They don't have to.
Yeah.
They could just wipe them out. They
know.
don't have to go in there on foot.
Yeah.
And nobody's giving them credit for the things that they are doing well.
Yeah.
And including our government. And I find that very sad and disheartening.
It is. It makes it more personal because I know what Yonkel went through as a child, and all I want for him and his family is peace. They just want to live a normal life in Israel. I've asked him, like, do you feel at home here, even though you were born in Belarus? He says the only place he has ever felt at home is in Israel. And his children are there, and his grandchildren are there, and they just want to be happy. They just want
Absolutely.
they just want to live. I mean, he went through the Holocaust, literally, as a Holocaust survivor, to do this.
Did you make it to Israel?
I have not gone. I really want to go.
It's a beautiful place. I've never been outside the United States, but I know that Israel, just the pictures of it's very gorgeous.
It's on my bucket list. I'm probably gonna go to Toronto first to see a knot, and then make the trip to Israel. I would love to go for sure.
That would be. I always talk about, man, I wish I'd win the lottery because I would. That's what I would do is I would travel
Yeah.
and visit different historical sites because that's kind of my thing.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's not just World War II or the Holocaust. I'm interested in all kinds of history, but I find American history after. During and after World War II, fascinating.
Yeah.
Like the ice cream ships of World War II. That's a fascinating story in itself. That the United States Navy had ships that they had converted to ice cream barges that made ice cream for the troops. And it was especially demoralizing for the other side because they're 5 miles away from their house and can't get food. Yeah. But these guys that are chasing after them are eating ice cream out of buckets. And so it's a really funny story, but sad at the same time because of what we had to go through to get there. But
yeah, no, history's good. It has the tragedies, it has the heartbreak, but the story continues for humans. Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts and opinions about what's going on in Israel and in Gaza right now? We don't have to get into it if you don't want to. We can skip right over that. But if you want to get into it, what are your thoughts?
You know, I learned the story this year of the family. And so for me, it is so fresh and it's still very heartbreaking. I've lost, a lot of sleep. There's been a lot of crying involved in it. This is only like the third time I've actually talked about the story outside of the family because even like his own dad and his own grandpa didn't know what actually happened to the family. And so to be able to deliver that to them was amazing. So just learning the story in the Holocaust was rough enough, but then seeing this on my social media and what people are saying about Jews,
Right.
it's just like driving the knife into my heart even more. And so I think it's just because it's so fresh for me. The wound is still like wide open.
Right.
That it's just very difficult to hear people chant that they want Jews to not be here on this earth.
Right.
Is hard for me to understand.
Another terrible one that I've heard is "Death to Israel, Death to America." Like, and we're hearing that chanted in on college campuses all around America, and it's. I don't even know what to say. I'm speechless. Like my wife here is, she's just now kind of getting into. Have you ever heard of Peaky Blinders?
It's a TV show, right?
Yeah, on Netflix.
Yeah.
So towards the end of that show, they kind of get into a little bit of fascism and the causes and the. It's just a really neat way to kind of get her into it. And we started watching that show, and then she's like, I get it now. And so she's been interested, and we've been watching things, and we're watching I can't remember the name of the dang show now, but it was Holocaust survivors telling their stories.
Okay.
And I've just got tears streaming down my face, and she's looking at me, and she's like, this is really interesting, but I'm finding this interesting too.
I know. Yeah, and it's extra special because tomorrow is Yom HaShoah.
Yeah.
So the Holocaust Remembrance Day that was started in the 1950s.
Yeah, and we're going to actually release this on International Holocaust Remembrance Day.
And I'll be in Jeff City at the governor's mansion celebrating,
That's
not really celebrating,
awesome.
remembering Holocaust Remembrance Day. My husband gets to go as well.
That's awesome.
Yes, it
well,
will be.
I just, I didn't even know there was an International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Like that was, you brought that to my attention, and I was like, yes, that's a great idea. Let's release. And like I was telling you in the messages when I was asking you to be on the show, I don't know how to approach this subject with respect.
Yeah.
Because my first thought was I was going to walk into a synagogue with my business card and ask somebody, hey, can you come talk history and the things that are going on? And I thought, for whatever reason, that would be disrespectful. And I was talking to my wife. I was like, man, I'm trying to be respectful, trying to think. And I was doing this for like 2 weeks, trying to figure out a respectful way to talk to someone. And she did a little bit of research, and she came across an article from KQ2 that featured you. And she's like, check this out. And then I read through the story, and I watched the little clip, and I was like, I think I'm going to message her. And I very much appreciate you being here and telling your story and sharing your story with me. And you said you are going back to Europe.
Yes.
And I'd like to have you back on so we could talk about the remainder of your trip and some updates.
Yes.
And
I'd love to.
the stuff, the current stuff. So I kind of tie in the current events going on in Ukraine and the current events going on in Iran, Israel. I kind of tie those together because I don't know if anybody really understands, like, Iran's being funded by Russian, it's all a big conglomerate.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. It's very complicated.
It is very complicated. I want to kind of get a geopolitical strategist on the show at some point, but I don't know any. And so I really enjoy doing in studio interviews. I do have a couple Zoom interviews. But some you lose some of that personal aspect.
Yeah.
And I got a really good one coming up. Like at the end of the month, I talked a guy into being on the show. But he's a big podcaster. He's my favorite podcaster. And so I'm just now starting this whole deal, and I don't really know how to approach people yet. And so when I asked you to be on the show, you were kind of apprehensive, but I was like,
I was a little bit.
I was like, hey, we'll make it through there together. We'll do this together. And so I'm very glad that you shared your story. Are you planning on doing any books or?
That's another question people ask me is, when is the book coming? I am not an author by any means. I really just like talking to people. I feel like there is power in books, but also just being able to just have conversations is also powerful. So for me, this is my comfort. I think being a teacher, I'm used to talking. If a book were to come, I already know like the opening line and how I want it to go. So we'll see. Maybe one day. I don't know. Not right now. I'm going back to school. So
If you ever need any help getting anything started, I'll
yeah.
help with whatever I can help with.
Thank you. Thank you.
Like this stuff, I mean, it looks difficult, but it's really easy. Like she does the most difficult part. The most difficult part of podcasting for us is editing, and that's just because we don't know anything. And
You guys are good.
So she's 38, I'm 39, and we don't know. She went to college for business management, so she knows about computers, whereas I'm kind of computer illiterate. And so running all these programs myself, after I'm taught how to do it, I can do it. But then the editing software that we use, you open it up and it looks just like craziness. And I'm like, can you handle this? She's like, yeah, I can do it. And then come to find out, like she's got to watch videos and figure it out. So the longer that we go on, the better the podcast gets. I try to explain it to people that this is my hobby. And I never really, of course, if I make money, awesome. But if it never makes money, at least I've got a very cool hobby.
Yeah.
And I think that once we get multiple camera angles in here and we figure out how to, I know you've done a lot of research and you have a PowerPoint presentation.
Yep.
If you want to, if next time we get together or something, we can run through that PowerPoint presentation and we can also have it up on the screen.
I'd love to.
And you got some pictures you can share with us. And we've already talked about the thumbnail in the video. I wanted a couple pictures that maybe we can cycle through there. And I'm very impressed. But how old are you, if you
I'm
don't mind
30.
me asking? You're 30?
Yeah.
And I'm very impressed by your thirst for that knowledge.
Thank you.
And you don't see that very often in older people, let alone younger people.
Yeah.
And I don't see the kind of curiosity that I have in anybody. And because I don't really, it's not really a curiosity killed the cat kind of thing. It's just like, if you don't know, you don't know. And the subjects that really interest me, I'll do a deep dive in them. I'll forget most of the things that I learned.
There's so much.
But at least I'm diving into it, and I'm not. It really bothers me that people stop learning after school. It's like
there's so much.
There is, even with technology, and even if you don't know math past, like you don't really need all the math and science and stuff. You were absolutely right on that. I've got a totally weird look on school and college. I don't think you need it at all. Just educate yourself on what you want to learn. That's good enough.
There you go.
But with the history, I think a lot of people miss out on just the things that actually happened, because Victor writes the history books. And in our schools, we were all taught these things, but we just glazed over the worst parts because they don't want us to know the bad parts. They want us to know what happened, but they're not going to show us what happened.
Yeah.
And I think it would have been beneficial for me as a youngster to see visually the things that I've saw recently in documentaries. There's some good documentaries online about the Holocaust, and they get graphic.
Yeah, they do. They're very hard.
I feel like people need to see that, especially right now, because it's happening again, and it's happening in China, it's happening in Ukraine, and it's happening in Israel and Gaza, and I wish it would stop.
Me too. I just want peace. I would like to think that's what most people want.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Well, I really do appreciate you coming and letting me come and talk about the family. I am in love with the family. The Feldmans they've overtaken my heart for sure.
So when's the last time you talked to the family?
I talk to Anat every day.
Yeah?
Yes, every day I talk to Anat. Yonkel, I've Zoomed him once. I would just Zoom him every day, all day if you let me, but that's a little creepy. The time difference with Israel is a little tricky too, but.
I find when I explain to people my curiosity and people want to talk about themselves. Everybody wants to talk about themselves. And when I ask those questions, ask people about themselves, and I find it easier to tell them, like, hey, I'm genuinely curious. I'm kind of dumb, and I just love people. I love to talk to people. And one of the things I wanted to start the podcast for is because I love talking to people, love meeting people, and I've been a stay-at-home dad for 10 years.
Yeah.
So my only interactions are with children. And so I want to talk to adults, and I want to talk to adults about the things I'm interested in, like history and CIA stuff, FBI stuff, all the craziness. But nobody, like, I don't know very many people that are into that or have time to, outside of work, to dive into a 2 or 3 hour conversation with me without being, excluding their family. So I really appreciate you coming out. I don't know how long we've been recording, but
I think it's like an hour. Yeah, we probably.
did you say you had some pictures of
I do.
the trip?
I can show you the Feldmans.
And when we will absolutely share this picture on the bottom of the screen.
Yes.
Any picture she shows us will pop up there on the bottom of the screen, so you guys can see them.
Not when she's a little kid in Israel. And then I have some pictures of the synagogue I was talking about. So this is the David Friedman Synagogue here in St. Joe, or the cemetery, the David Friedman Cemetery here in St. Joe, Shalom Shalom. And then most of our family is buried in that. And then this was the actual synagogue. There's a picture of it that Mayor Udall helped build. And then this piece of metal that I was talking about is inside the building at the cemetery, and it's the only thing that still exists from that. And then there was a really old record book in there as well. And unfortunately, the current synagogue, which looks like that in St. Joe, what street is it on?
17th and Francis.
It's closing down. So unfortunately, yes, the Jewish population in St. Joe has just gotten so small that they are relocating to a new area.
Probably more like Kansas City.
Yes,
a bigger area down
they
there.
have a large Jewish population. And then that's the Together program that I was talking about. And then this is what the cemetery in Brest, Belarus is kind of going to look like.
And again, we'll blow these up on the screen so you guys can see them. And do you have any links that you want shared or anything?
I'm definitely going to share.
I'm sure you don't want people reaching out to you personally. But.
I'll definitely share the link to the Together program that I was telling you about. And then if anyone ever wants to know any book recommendations, documentaries, I would be happy to share those with you.
Absolutely. You want to did great.
Okay.
And
first ever podcast. So.
I'm probably more nervous than you, and I'll tell you
that.
I washed my damn house. We like I said, we just bought this house in January, and so I was like, the front of the house covered in moss and mildew, and I was like, Ashley, I'm going to invite a teacher over to the house, and so like for whatever reason, we don't think of teachers as real people.
I promise we are.
So
promise we are.
Like you never really think of teachers outside of the school, but then you run into them and it's like, hey,
I know,
It's
not
kind of
living
like
in our
running into
classroom.
the HR lady, you
yes,
know?
Yes.
So I promise you I'm more nervous than you are.
No, it's great. Anyone who wants to hear about the family, I'm going to tell the story of the family. So I really do appreciate, again, it means a lot to keep the stories alive.
It's been awesome.
Thank you.
And it's been awesome to meet you as well. And we'll talk again.
Yes,
With that,
absolutely.
We'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Thank you.